All right, so we have to move on to our next presenter about red tide and Lake Okeechobee management. We have Lenny Landau. Oh, I pronounced it right. Sorry. And we'll move your slides for you. The purpose is to share updated research findings related to the recently adopted and implemented LOSOM protocols and possible benefits to reducing conditions favorable for long, severe red tide events. This relates to water quality improvement action 5, support harmful algal bloom, including macroalgae research and monitoring, and measures to proactively reduce their drivers through the reduction of anthropogenic nutrient pollution and other contributors.
And Nicole's bringing you a clicker right now. So you'll be using that to advance slides if you'd like.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Take a deep breath. I think everybody said. Got tall. Okay, well, thank you for having me here. This we're going to talk about something that's pretty really interesting, but it's this is not going to be a scientific presentation. This is going to be an overview of work that I've done over the last 8 years. And we're going to talk about results, and it's going to be, I think, relatively easy to understand. So to be very clear about what I'm going to talk about. Around here, you can see Lake Okeechobee, and you can see the Gulf of Mexico. What I've been studying is red tide on the southwest coast of Florida, and what we're going to talk about this morning is when we talk about Lake Okeechobee management and red tide. We're going to be talking about the level of Lake Okeechobee, and we're going to talk about the duration of red tide. That's what this is about, just so it's very clear. And I'll explain a little bit later why that's what we discussed. So, Jennifer insisted that I put in a slide about myself. And I decided after we worked on this slide that this may be the most important slide in the whole thing, because it'll tune you into who I am and why I'm here. Where'd it go?
Other way. There you
go. Okay.
Oh. Here you go.
Anyway, my name is Lenny Landau. I'm a mechanical engineer. I worked for the General Electric Company for about almost 40 years in Cincinnati, and 10 years down here on Longboat Key. All my career has been on working on aircraft engines. So if you commercial aircraft engines. So if you fly from here to any place else, you're probably flying on something that has something to do with. I'm like I said, I'm an engineer. I'm not a scientist. My biology background consists of high school biology, and so when I got here, I decided that I'm going to apply my problem-solving skills. Engineering problem-solving skills can be applied to just about anything. So we got here in 2002. I worked on all kinds of things in the community, beach renourishment, traffic, water and sewer systems, all kinds of stuff. And then we had a red tide in 2018. All of you can remember it. It started in 2017. It went through 2018. It continued into 2019. I concluded it was the worst thing ever. Everything stopped. There's nobody on the beaches. I couldn't go biking. I couldn't go fishing. I couldn't do anything. So I decided that I wanted to learn what this was about. And if you look at what I was reading in the papers, Sarasota Memorial Herald Tribune, true mitigation isn't getting rid of algae. The real mitigation is compensating businesses. Can you imagine anything that would make you madder? And then on the right, experts say no cure for red tide. So this is just maddening. So I decided that I was going to spend some time and try and figure out what's going on. So my whole thing, where it says mission, is to mitigate red tide. So I decided back in about 2018 that while everybody was getting paid lots of money, there was lots of research, that I was going to go off and I was going to try and figure out how to mitigate red tide. Okay, that's what I was interested in the background. I needed to learn about it, how to understand it, but that was all just sort of background. That was to try and understand what could we do to mitigate it. So you should be excited because I'm going to tell you this morning that we found a way to mitigate it, and it's already being implemented. So this is rather exciting, and it's very straightforward. Now, Jennifer wanted me to mention the paper on red tide duration and the impact on duration. And about, I don't know if it was a year ago, David Tomasco gave a pitch here on the paper. And it was, I don't know if you remember it, but it's really an important paper. I'm going to talk about it in a minute, so I'm not going to talk about it here right now. One way I'm going to get it. Okay, now, this is a slide that talks about everything you wanted to know about red tide. And when Jennifer and I first talked, she says, you got to really explain it. And I said, I have no intention to explain it. We could spend 3 hours talking about this slide, but it talks about a couple of very basic things. Red tide is a carenivorous bloom, and to define a bloom compared to what was just described, a red tide bloom is when there's more growth than death. So it's either growing or it's going away. That's what a bloom is. There are two effects. There's stuff that comes from land, from sea to land, and there's stuff that comes from land to sea. These are the things that people study. Most of the study is related to sea to land. In other words, so if you look at carenivorous has a range of temperature that it'll exist. It has a range of salinity that it can exist. So there's a thing called the loop current. You all know about the loop current and the effect it has an effect. And we could spend an hour talking about loop current. There's cyanobacteria. There's trichodesium, Staphylococcus. There's the iron dust from Africa. You've all heard about all this. Is all important stuff, and we could talk about it. But all of these things contribute to the carenivorous coming from offshore land. So red tide initiation requires a complex combination of natural sea to land factors. Red tide starts offshore. It doesn't start in the bay. It doesn't start in a river. It comes from offshore. The stuff that comes from shore, and I mentioned up there the Lake Okeechobee blue green algae. I'm not going to talk about it, but it comes out of Lake Okeechobee and it goes in both directions. Land to sea factors impact duration, but they don't impact duration. They impact initiation. So if you dump the nutrients into the Gulf of Mexico, if it's not there, it's not going to start. If it's there, you'll feed it. Okay. This is my summary of what we need to understand about red tide. I don't know, is there a pointer on this thing? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. But if you go back and take all of the data that's available, we go back to about 1850, and there's stuff that went back before that, and look at what we know about when red tide starts. What we find out is that it's most probable to start in September through November. That's when it starts. You may have an initiation in June, July, or August, but usually it doesn't happen primarily because the water's too warm. And then after that, once it starts, it can continue. That's what's C, or you can have an extension, and I'll tell you in a minute what that's about. Then we have a rainy season, June through September. It doesn't matter where you are in the state of Florida. The rain is June through, so that's when it happens. Right now, we don't have any rain. We wish we would have rain, but we don't have any rain, and we're probably going to be till May, June before it shows up. And then we have the hurricanes. So red tide will initiate 10 to 40 miles offshore and are pushed to shore by wind and current. Nutrients from land can impact red tide duration. Carenivorous is slow growing, takes from 20 to 40 days for nutrients to impact the bloom. So if you have nutrients that are coming from Lake Okeechobee, going down the Caloosahatchee, from the time that it gets into the Gulf, it takes 20 to 40 days before you start to see an impact. And corona brevis, if it's not present, nutrient from land have no effect. It's just basics, okay? There's a whole lot of this, there's a lot of data that goes into this, but that's what happens. No. Okay, so we'll talk first about paper. This is this relationship between Caloosahatchee hydraulic load or nutrients and duration. It turns out that the question is why are we so focused on duration? The reason is that if you try and measure the intensity of red tide, the data is so poor there's no way to measure anything. But if you have, from the data we have, you can look at it and you can see when it starts and when it ends. And frankly, it wasn't until 2007 that there was sufficient data to actually even do it. And then the other thing is the hydraulic load. I was convinced for a long time that rain was important, that when we had heavy rain, we would have an intense red tide. It wasn't until we found out that all of these flows are measured. They've been measured since 1937. So you can get hydraulic load that goes back a long time. And when we got our hands around that and we related correlation between duration and either the hydraulic load or the concentration of nutrients, that we found this correlation. So that was pretty dramatic. And then on the right, you see stuff that you're familiar with, Lake Okeechobee, Kissimmee River coming in from the north, S77, S79. These are all things that occur and are important to what's going on. I think I'm sure all of you are very familiar. So Lake Okeechobee discharges to the Caloosahatchee River, impacts to the Caloosahatchee water quality and hydraulic load, and the operation of S77 and S79 operations managed by the U.S. Corps of Engineers can impact red tide. And we will. So what is this about? Here's the evolution of what's happened in Florida. Maybe you better if I came over here. On the left-hand side, you can see what I called in the beginning, and you can see that the water flowed from in the middle of the state down through Lake Okeechobee and down to the Florida Bay, and there was very little flow that went east or west. Since 1930, we've had this dramatic increase in population from about 1.5 million people to 23 or 24 million people. We put this dike around Lake Okeechobee, and we built these structures, mainly S77. At the same time, the Caloosahatchee Basin had modifications for real estate and whatever was going on. The Kissimmee River was modified. They straightened the whole river out, which I'm sure you all know about, only to conclude that it polluted Lake Okeechobee and have another project to put it back to where it was. So the situation that we have now is water coming down the middle of the state, goes into Lake Okeechobee, and then it either goes east or west. So before, red tide initiation and duration was natural. It occurred out in the Gulf, and that's what happened. What we have now is it still initiates out in the Gulf, but the water that's flowing from down Caloosahatchee River affects the duration of the red tide. So now what's happening to us today is controlled where it wasn't before. They don't get it. Okay, so I really thought that going in that the impact of rain was really important. And if you look at rain versus, and on this chart, it starts in 1950, goes through 2024. These red bars are what I call extreme red tides. These are red tides that lasted more than a year. And why that's significant is if you go more than a year, you get to the next initiation season, and that can actually boost it. And then you'll see when we found that connection, we went back and looked at hurricanes. Were there any hurricanes? This correlate with hurricanes. And lo and behold, every one of these had major hurricanes or major events that impacted the Lake Okeechobee. So, and this is Florida rainfall. If you looked at the rainfall for Orlando or Fort Myers or Lake Okeechobee, you'll get exactly the same thing, that you get a peak in the rainfall at the time that we have these extreme red tide events. So they match up, and it's pretty significant. When you talk to the scientists about the impact of hurricanes on red tide, they'll talk about stirring the water up and making it colder. The big effect is what the effect that it has on Lake Okeechobee. Okay, here's the level of Lake Okeechobee. Those red dots are the years that we had major red tides. Every time we had one, the lake level went above 17 feet. 1953, 1994. And the thing you can see, there are other places where it went above 17 feet, but there was no red tide. And that's because there was no red tide. So if the lake went to 17 feet and you dumped the lake, there wasn't any major red tide. Remember before I said, if you really release this polluted water into the Gulf, it doesn't do anything if it's not there. The other thing you can see is that, like in 1953, look at where, to get above 17 feet, it started at about 13. In 94, it started at about 14. So the years that it went up and got above 17 feet, it started from a relatively high level. So Lake Okeechobee level exceeded 17 feet during the years of the extreme red tides. And when it does that, they're forced to release the water due to dike integrity and floods. And high level discharges when red tide isn't present have no effect. Okay, so now one of the things we know is that trying to relate rainfall to what's going on is near impossible. You don't know where it will rain one place, not in another. You need to get to the hydraulic load. And what you can see on this chart, it shows the 2004 red tide and the 2017 red tide. You can see the rainfall, and below it you see the hydraulic load. You can also see that there are places where there was high rainfall and low hydraulic load. You just look at lots of places. So there's no, you have to have high hydraulic load. You have high hydraulic load when you have high rainfall, but rainfall does not assure high hydraulic load. And that's because of the lake operations and the way they control the discharge of the water. So this is a key item. God. So this will take us around to where I got in 2018, and we had this terrible red tide. There was this Captain O'Neill. Are any of you familiar with him from Charlotte Harbor? He was all over the newspaper talking about how terrible this thing was. Fish are dying. He had all these videos. He said, this is catastrophic. It's something else. This is something that is impacting the whole population. O'Neill is calling on the lawmakers to find a solution to the devastating impact of red tide. And I called the guy up. I had several discussions with him, and he was just madder than hell that they released Lake Okeechobee, and it was causing this terrible problem. Nobody agreed with him, but that's what was going on. So that's where we were back in 2018. And then last year, we have this thing called LOSOM. Everybody familiar with LOSOM? I would assume you are. We all know about it. And it was released on August 12th of 24. And so I learned about this thing, and I said, well, that's interesting because this has been a major project. It describes how they want to operate the management of the lake and the river. And I said, that's fantastic. If we could do that, I'm gonna call them up and get them to do what I want, to lower the lake so that it doesn't go too high during the rainy season. And I think that's really gonna have a big effect. And everybody told me I was crazy. They said, anything that isn't written into the manual you will not, nobody will listen to you. If it's not in the manual, they won't do it. So I said, oh my God, this is an absolute tragedy, but here I'm on the verge of something that I think is really significant. I hope I pushed the right button. We got it. So here's what the manual is a very complex manual. It's got all kinds of stuff. But and this is a busy word chart, but it was designed to introduce a flexible system to manage the Lake Okeechobee. It had all kinds of stakeholders. I don't know, there was something over 50 stakeholders that were involved in developing it. It had everybody who had an interest, I think, was involved, whether or not they were fishermen or boaters or agriculture people or biologists. What everybody had an input into it. And it's the central tenet of the new approach is to significantly reduce harmful discharges, blue algae, nutrients, and general water quality to the northern estuaries, which with increasing flows to the south to the Everglades. This is exactly what we want. We want to manage it. We want to increase the flows to the Everglades. And a feature of LOSOM is something called recovery operations to lower the lake level before the next wet season to minimize the peak level and promote recovery of the lake's ecology. So I'm reading this thing and I'm saying, that's exactly what I want. I don't have to call them and do anything. That's exactly what I want. So although implemented for lake ecology and dike integrity, recover operations minimize the lake during the dry season to moderate the peak during the hurricane season. This is like a miracle. Reducing substantial nutrient-rich lake discharges during the red tide season. So here I am trying to figure out what to do. I'm going to call these people up and suggest that they do something. And lo and behold, it looks like that's what they're doing. So here's here's the news. Red tide is going to continue to occur. It starts offshore. It's going to still start offshore. There isn't anything we can do. It is natural. But LOSOM recovery operations can mitigate extreme red tides and shorten peak lake levels of Lake Okeechobee. So all of a sudden, we've got something that's been implemented that's going to have a tremendous impact on red tide in the Gulf of Mexico. I'll show you, here's a plot that may be a little bit hard for you to see, but the black vertical line is when LOSOM was implemented. Lake level this year was down 2 feet at the end of the dry season from where it was. Right now, we're up at about 13.5 feet. It'll be down closer to 11. So we're not going to get back up to, because of the fact that they're releasing the lake now. What's going to happen is when we get to the next rainy season and hurricane season, it's very unlikely that it's going to go above 17 feet, which is what it takes to really have these extreme red tides. So to wrap this thing up, the locals used to think red tide is coming. I hope they don't dump Lake Okeechobee again, blah, blah, blah. And this chart says LOSOM should reduce extended red tide blooms. I put that in because we need to, I'm not a scientist, and we need to go through a couple of seasons and verify what's going to happen. But from all of the data that I've looked at, I think that we're not going to have any more of these extended red tides. And the red tides that we have on the west coast of Florida are going to be something less than 8 months. And because of the fact that we're not going to get this big head in Lake Okeechobee. So that's the discovery. So here we are. I've been working at it. I didn't do anything, but something's going to happen. And the thing that's really interesting is when something doesn't happen, people don't report on it. But the fact is that this is a real, appears to be a real success. And I think those of you who have worked at it really need to be complimented. It's really a good thing. And I think if but people need to understand it so that when we don't have red tide, which if we had it, everybody would be screaming. When we'll have it, but it doesn't last as long as we thought, that's really good news. And I think it's really something else. So that's that. I want to introduce Barbara Kirkpatrick, who's with me. Dr. Barbara Kirkpatrick. She's probably, in my opinion, one of the most knowledgeable red tide scientists that we know about. And I also want to mention that the paper that we wrote on duration, I developed the relationship between Lake Okeechobee, actually, and duration. And I've given lots of talks, I've written articles and stuff, but I'm not a scientist. So I concluded that if I go write a paper or do something, nobody's going to listen to it. So that's why David Tomasco volunteered after we got together on it. He volunteered to write the paper, and Jennifer was involved. We had several other scientists, and I'm very happy to just be in the background because the paper's is really very significant, and it's gotten lots of attention. And Barbara's been helping me on this latest stuff that we've been doing. So while I don't have the credentials, I surround myself with the best people, and I think I'm glad you had me here today. I think you understand, but this is really very significant, and you're all to be congratulated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, knock on wood, we don't have red tide and hurricanes this year. Any quick question or comment? Somebody?
No quick question. Did you do any evaluation by any chance of the banking practices that the Army Corps did post Hurricane Ian, which was prior to LOSOM's inaction, but it was a similar method of holding?
Only to the extent that I monitored all of the data and looked at when we had red tide, when we didn't have it, and what the flows were.
I'm just wondering if that's something that, because I personally think that played a large role in the different outcomes post Ian with red tide versus post Irma with red tide. I'm just wondering if anyone who's more dialed into this has done that actual evaluation.
No. But if it didn't.
Banking, or you mean like storage of water in the upper basin?
Still in Lore's 08, so they couldn't do recovery operations. So the Army Corps announced that they were banking water in the lake instead of letting it out when we had all those active blue-green algae blooms on the lake immediately post Ian.
I wasn't familiar with the term of banking term, so thank you.
It was novel to a lot of us at the time.
The key thing is during the dry to drain the lake as much as you can so that it doesn't get too high and it's good for the bottom of the lake.
So Stephen Radney from the Corps would like to comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say that they did change their schedule a lot after the dike was completed. There was a lot of issues with the dike with it not being completed where they couldn't store as much water in there. But after the dike was completed, they started changing their schedule. That was prior to the LOSOM.
Even though the dike is stronger, keeping the level down has a big effect on the head and how much flow they're going to have when they open it. So you still, even though structurally it works, you really don't want it. It's much worse when you allow the water to get too high.
Yeah, and I would just say that zooming out, I think the premise of hydrological restoration and trying to get towards more natural water management and how that relates to water quality and reducing nutrient loading and how that in turn can help with harmful algae blooms. That's the big message here. Like, as we make improvements, we're hoping for these benefits, right? And I like how Lenny put time will tell. I mean, obviously, but it's a promising message. And it is important to kind of see, how this progresses and note if we start seeing modest positive improvements so that we can give that feedback to policymakers who have to make these investment decisions as to whether or not these investments are paying off. So I just wanted to share this because I think it's a very hopeful message.
Anything is that the pollution that comes into the river along the Caloosahatchee River, all of that stuff, also makes it worse. So that while we're talking about the flow down the Caloosahatchee, anything we can do to take the nitrogen and phosphorus out of the water is really worthwhile.
Absolutely.
So can I make a couple comments? Because
Yes.
my county is on the lake. I 65 years before around the lake. So talking about keeping the lake low, there's the advantage to that, except for like right now, we're having concerns about seagrass dying because they won't flow out of the lake.
Right.
So you want the lake low, then you want more water, and we get into a management program where we're going to have to manage water, which feels understand we may get into a rationing program. If the lake gets low, we do want to get it low in places where we can clean the bottom. But the lake is not your reservoir. The lake is an ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
When you're talking about the pollution, remember the pollution doesn't come from the lake. It comes from Orlando and up north. So the lake's got a dike around it. Water only comes in for two places. It comes in from Orlando, Fish Eating Creek, and it's the Boga. It isn't coming in from the farmers and that. So that load of nutrients that you're talking about is coming from Orlando. You got to start it at the source, not at the discharge place. So when you talk about keeping the lake low, it's an ecosystem. Our snail kites can't nest without sufficient water. So we have to balance that ecosystem within the lake, not just look at the lake as a management system for the coastal water. So I want you to keep that in mind.
And that's what LOSOM takes trust is, I think,
and we're
tries to
still working
consider
on
all
that.
that.
So, but like now, we've kept the lake low, and we don't have any rainfall. And they're talking about we may have to go into rationing because of that.
Yeah.
So, you know,
And I read the report every week that they're not getting enough water out of the Caloosahatchee, and they're requesting water from Lake Okeechobee, and all of it's going, most of it's going west. Almost none of it's being sent east, best I could tell.
They're not discharging any to the east.
Right.
It's 365 CFS to the west right now. So, and we're below normal, so we got to watch the numbers of the lake so low that we don't have enough water to need water, and it's just not the seagrass.
Anything else?
Are you going to stick around for a little bit if people want to talk to you after the meeting, or do you have to go, Lenny? Well, if
Or
he's around, you can talk.
or if you need his contact information, I'm
Yeah.
happy to share it. And I just want to say, to your point, Paul, that our LAKO page on the Water Atlas now has a LAKO tracker that also tracks simultaneously with the river. So, and it has the ecological min and max for the lake and the river. And so you can see live, like when one is out or both are out of their ecological envelopes. And the idea is, to your point, we need to manage the system to maintain the health of both. So we appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Barbara.
Hi, everyone. Again, I'm a member of the Harmful Water Task Force, Red Tide Task Force, and I just thought I'd share with you one of the actions. Again, the task force, both Blue Green and Red Tide. One of our charters is really to look at where the gaps are in knowledge and see if we can get funding for those gaps. And as you know, nutrients and Ponea brevis has been a very messy story for many, many years. We held a workshop last spring, very intense, kind of 3-day powerhouses to try to identify what those gaps are in our knowledge, and assuming we get the same amount of funding from the state that we have been funded, then we're going to pay for the budget, but we will initiate or put out an RFP specifically trying to address those gaps in knowledge we have. So I guess the message here I wanted is just we're aware of it. We know we have gaps in knowledge and how that can translate to best practices. And another little piece of examples.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. All right, we should move on. Thank you again for that presentation.
Thank you.
The next agenda item is the CHNP technical projects and updates given by Nicole Idavia. To give us an update on the technical projects underway in progress, which have been completed since last cycle. Each project addresses multiple actions from the CCMP plan.
Okay, thank you. So I'll try and keep it brief, because I know that you all have your own updates too. So these are, again, technical projects that are directly funded and managed. So the first one up to bat is the CHNP Water Atlas. This is an ongoing sort of annually funded project. We're maintaining the Water Atlas as sort of a database and knowledge tool to for the public and for researchers to access all of the information that you all are gathering as members of partnerships, but as your cities, counties, agencies, and put it all into one place for analysis purposes and for the help inform management. So this is one of the sort of key items that's identified in that monitoring strategy we talked about. This is the data that everyone's gathering, and here's where CHNP is filling in sort of that gap to put it all in a publicly available place. So these are just some improvements that we've added to the Water Atlas. As mentioned, we did revamp it. We did a whole Water Atlas 2.0 pretty recently. So these are just a couple of tools we've added since sort of that revamp of the Water Atlas. There is updated the water quality trend analysis so this is it was our 2025 update with 2024 data, as there's a little bit of a gap in how, when the data gets uploaded. So that's all up there, and it's rate of record and 10-year trends for water quality data collected at fixed stations in the watershed and also out in the estuary. We have also started to incorporate new data sources now that they are available in WIN. Suncoast Waterkeeper, for example, is now gathering fecal indicator bacteria data, and so that's being pulled into the Water Atlas out of state database. And then we have added the water body pages now feature a 5-year chart design, which you can kind of see in that lower right-hand corner. So before it was just, the charts just had all of the data points on there for each of the parameters. For instance, chlorophyll A. It was all of the data points for chlorophyll A over a certain time frame. But now those charts are displaying a 6-month moving average, annual mean, and thresholds for each parameter. So kind of at a glance, you can see what's going on too. But the data is still all in there too. If you ever wanted to download it and look through it all, So those are some kind of new tools on the Water Atlas. And that leads into, we, as mentioned, do have Water Atlas 2.0 that is now out and available. And it is such a wonderful data dense resource